A single moment of recognition can shatter the careful lies we've built our lives upon. For Olivia Martinez, Tuesday mornings tasted like burnt coffee and broken promises. At 28, she had the kind of exhaustion that lived in her bones, the kind that no amount of sleep could fix. She moved through the Valley View diner with practiced efficiency, refilling cups before they emptied, clearing plates before customers finished chewing. Her hands never stopped moving because if they did, the math started. $127,000 in medical debt, $4,800 due by Friday for her grandmother's Alzheimer's medication, $17 in her checking account. The numbers were a tarot reading of a bleak future, and Olivia had learned not to look too closely. The diner sat on Highway 50 just outside Sacramento, where the morning sun slanted through grease-filmed windows and painted everything the color of old gold. The scent of burnt coffee mixed with diesel fumes from the semis idling in the parking lot. The vinyl booths had been patched so many times they felt like scar tissue under customers' elbows. In the corner, an oscillating fan pushed stale air in lazy circles, doing nothing but redistributing the heat and the smell of bacon grease that had seeped into the walls decades ago. The linoleum floor had been mopped 1,000 times, but never quite came clean. There were stains that had become part of the pattern, accepted as permanent. This was Olivia's kingdom of cracked formica and flickering fluorescent lights. Every morning before her shift, she kissed the antique pocket watch her grandmother had given her, 18-karat gold with a rose engraving, 7 petals spiraling clockwise. It was the last thing Rosa Martinez remembered clearly, even as Alzheimer's slowly erased everything else. Para mi amor eterno, the inscription read, for my eternal love. Her grandfather Miguel had given it to Rosa the day they crossed into America from Mexico in 1952, proof that they'd survived the journey with something beautiful intact. Olivia carried it in her apron pocket like a talisman, a promise that some things couldn't be taken away. Robert Ashford, on the other hand, wore his grandfather's watch like a crown. At 62, he had the kind of wealth that insulated him from the world, the kind that turned other people into scenery. His Italian leather shoes cost more than Olivia made in a month. His suit was tailored in a way that announced money without shouting. He moved through life expecting doors to open, expecting people to step aside, expecting the universe to bend slightly in his direction because it always had. The watch on his wrist was his inheritance made visible. Charles Ashford, his grandfather, had been a self-made man, or so the family mythology claimed. An industrialist who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd commissioned this watch in Switzerland in 1952 to celebrate his first million. Robert touched it the way other men touched wedding rings. Unconscious gesture that said, I belong to something larger than myself. I come from greatness. He had no idea that everything he believed was built on stolen ground. This isn't a redemption story. This is how a forgotten pocket watch exposed 3 generations of theft and revealed that some family treasures were never meant to be kept. This isn't a fairy tale where the poor girl marries the prince and everyone lives happily ever after. This is what happens when working-class dignity collides with inherited privilege, when the truth refuses to stay buried under decades of carefully maintained lies. This is about what people do when they discover that the foundation of their entire life is a fraud. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. Subscribe now, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. It was a Tuesday morning when their worlds collided over a cup of coffee neither of them would finish. Robert's Bentley had broken down 2 miles back on Highway 50, steam rising from under the hood like a white flag of surrender. His driver was arranging a tow, and Robert, who hadn't set foot in a roadside diner since his 20s, found himself pushing through the door of the Valley View with the expression of a man entering a foreign country without a passport. His shoes clicked against the linoleum like a countdown. Every head in the diner turned. They knew wealth when they saw it, even here, especially here. Robert slid onto a counter stool, his body language radiating impatience. Waiting was something other people did. Inconvenience was something that happened to other people. Olivia appeared with a coffee pot, her smile the kind that servers learned to wear like armor. Pleasant but impenetrable. She filled his cup without asking, set down creamer he wouldn't use, and turned to grab silverware. That's when Robert pulled out his pocket watch to check the time. He set it on the counter with the casual carelessness of someone who'd never worried about losing anything valuable. The gold caught the light. The rose engraving gleamed. 7 petals spiraling clockwise. A tiny dent on the lower left edge, no bigger than a pinhead. Olivia's hand stopped moving. The coffee pot hung suspended in midair. Her heart kicked against her ribs like something trying to escape. She knew that watch. She knew the weight of it, the way the engraving felt under your thumb, the exact shade of gold that caught morning light. She knew it because she'd held its twin 1,000 times, because it was in her apron pocket right now, warm against her hip. The watch her grandmother swore was one of a kind. The watch that represented everything her family had sacrificed to build a life in America. The watch that couldn't possibly exist in 2 places at once. But there it was, sitting on a billionaire's counter in a roadside diner in Sacramento, California. Identical. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The world narrowed to that single object on the counter. Gold, and impossible and wrong in every way that mattered. She set the coffee pot down with trembling hands. Her fingers found the watch in her apron pocket, clutching it through the fabric like a lifeline. The metal was warm from being pressed against her body all morning. She'd kissed it before her shift, the way she did every day, whispering a prayer her grandmother no longer remembered how to say. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Robert didn't look up from his phone. He was typing something, his manicured fingers moving with the casual speed of someone who'd never had to choose between groceries and electricity. "Excuse me, sir." Louder this time. He glanced up, eyebrows raised in polite irritation. The expression of a man interrupted. "My grandmother has a watch just like yours." The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, nothing happened. The diner sounds continued around them. The sizzle of the griddle, the scrape of forks on plates, the rumble of a semi pulling out of the parking lot. But in the space between Olivia and Robert, time had stopped. Robert's eyes moved from her face to the watch on the counter, then back to her face. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A door closing, a wall rising. "That's impossible," he said. "Not really. Or what a coincidence, or how interesting." Just impossible. Delivered like a judge's verdict. Final and inarguable. Olivia pulled her grandmother's watch from her apron pocket. Her hands shook as she held it up. The gold caught the fluorescent light, the rose engraving gleaming. 7 petals spiraling clockwise. The tiny dent on the lower left edge. The inscription that had been worn smooth by decades of Rosa's thumb tracing it. "Parmi amor eterno, 1952. Robert's body went rigid. He stared at the watch in Olivia's hand like she'd pulled out a weapon. His jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck tightened. For 3 full seconds he didn't breathe. When he finally moved, it was with the slow precision of a predator deciding whether to attack or retreat. He picked up his watch, held it next to hers. The silence stretched. Other customers were starting to notice the tension. Heads turning. Conversations dropping to whispers. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, dangerous. "My grandmother gave it to me. It belonged to my grandfather." "That's not possible." Robert's fingers tightened around his watch. "This watch has been in the Ashford family since 1952. My grandfather, Charles Ashford, commissioned it from a master watchmaker in Switzerland. It's one of a kind. There are documents provenance a complete history." Olivia felt heat rising in her chest. "My grandmother received this watch from my grandfather, Miguel Martinez, the day they immigrated to America from Guadalajara, Mexico, in 1952. The air between them crackled. Robert's eyes narrowed, scanning her face like he was reading a contract for loopholes. "Then your grandmother is either mistaken or lying." Each word was precisely placed, designed to cut. "My grandfather was a self-made man. He built his fortune from nothing. This watch represents everything he achieved. It's documented, authenticated, insured for $500,000. Whatever your grandmother told you, she's wrong." The words hit Olivia like a slap. Her grandmother, the woman who'd raised 3 children alone after Miguel died, who'd worked as a seamstress until her fingers cramped, who'd saved every penny to send Olivia's mother to community college, was being called a liar by a man in $1,000 shoes. "My grandmother doesn't lie." Olivia's voice shook, but not from fear, from rage. She can barely remember her own name anymore, but she remembers this watch. She remembers my grandfather giving it to her, telling her it was proof that no matter how hard things got, they'd survived with something beautiful. Robert pulled out his wallet. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and dropped it on the counter like he was discarding trash. For the coffee, he said, and the entertainment. He pocketed his watch and stood, buttoning his suit jacket with movements that suggested the conversation was over. Dismissed, beneath his concern. Something inside Olivia snapped. She'd spent her entire life being dismissed by doctors who talked over her about her grandmother's care, by bill collectors who didn't care why she couldn't pay, by managers who saw her as replaceable. She was done being invisible. Then I'll prove it. Robert paused halfway to the door. The entire diner had gone quiet. Even the cook had stopped scraping the griddle. I have mine, you have yours. I'm going to find out which one is real. And when I do, her voice caught, but she pushed through. When I do, everyone's going to know the truth. Robert turned slowly. The look he gave her was different now. Calculating, measuring. He saw something he hadn't seen before. Not a waitress. A threat. He walked back to the counter with deliberate steps, pulled out his phone, typed something, looked at her with eyes that had gone cold and empty. You want the truth? His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. Fine. We'll authenticate both watches. Bring yours to Clarendon and Associates on K Street tomorrow at 2 o'clock. They're the finest antique appraisers in California. We'll settle this with facts, not family fairy tales. He slid a business card across the counter. Robert Ashford, CEO, Ashford Industries. But I'm warning you, miss, he paused, waiting. Martinez. Olivia Martinez. Miss Martinez. He picked up his coffee cup, took a single sip, and set it back down. Some doors are best left closed. Some questions don't have answers you want to hear. If your grandmother's memory is all you have left of her, maybe you should let her keep her stories. The words were almost kind, but the tone underneath was pure ice, a threat wrapped in concern. Olivia met his eyes and didn't blink. I'll be there too. Robert held her gaze for another long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and final, and walked out. Through the window, she watched him climb into the back of a black town car that had appeared as if summoned. The car pulled away, leaving only the faint smell of expensive cologne and the $100 bill on the counter. The diner erupted in whispers. Olivia stood frozen, her grandmother's watch still clutched in her fist. The gold was warm, almost hot now. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Jerry, the cook, leaned through the service window. Liv, what the hell was that? She didn't answer. She was staring at the business card, at Robert Ashford's name embossed in gold lettering. CO, Billionaire, a man who could crush her without thinking, the way you'd step on an ant. But he'd agreed to the authentication. Why? If he was so certain his watch was the real one, why not just laugh her off, forget she existed? Unless he wasn't certain. Unless somewhere deep down, in a place he didn't want to look, Robert Ashford knew something was wrong with his family's perfect story. Olivia pocketed both the watch and the business card. Her hands had stopped shaking. The fear was still there, cold and heavy in her stomach. But underneath it was something else. Something harder. Determination. She'd made a promise to her grandmother the day Rosa stopped recognizing her face. She'd promised to protect her, to honor her memory, to never let anyone erase the sacrifices Rosa and Miguel had made. And if that meant going to war with a billionaire, then that's exactly what she'd do. Margaret, the other waitress, sidled up next to her. You know who that was? Robert Ashford. His family owns half of Sacramento. He just picked a fight with old money. I didn't pick a fight, Olivia said quietly. I'm finishing when my grandfather started. She glanced at the clock. Her shift ended in 6 hours. She had to call the authentication company, had to figure out how to take time off tomorrow, had to visit Rosa, and somehow explain what was happening without upsetting her. But first, she needed to understand what she was walking into. She pulled out her phone and typed Robert Ashford's name into the search bar. The first result was a glowing profile in Sacramento Business Monthly. The second was a photo of Robert at a charity gala, surrounded by politicians and tech moguls. The third was an article about Ashford Industries real estate holdings throughout California. She scrolled deeper, found an older article from a decade ago about the Ashford family legacy, complete with a black and white photo of Charles Ashford from 1960. He stood in front of his first factory, hand resting on a cornerstone, pocket watch chain visible across his vest. The caption read, "Charles Ashford Immigrant Success Story," with the watch that never left his side. Immigrant Success Story. The words snagged in her mind. She clicked through to the full article, skimming the biography. Born in Boston, 1920. Started his first business in 1952. Built an empire through determination and vision. No mention of where he'd gotten his startup capital. No mention of Mexico or Guadalajara or anything that might connect him to her grandfather. But 1952, the same year Miguel and Rosa had crossed the border. The same year both watches were supposedly made. Olivia saved the article and kept scrolling. Somewhere in this manufactured legacy was the truth. Somewhere in the gaps between the official story and her grandmother's fading memories was an answer. And tomorrow, in an appraiser's office on K Street, she'd start digging until she found it. Even if it meant destroying everything Robert Ashford believed about his family. Even if it meant facing the possibility that her own family story wasn't what she thought it was. The truth mattered more than comfort. It always had. That night, Olivia sat beside her grandmother's bed at Sunrise Memory Care and held Rosa's hand. The room smelled like antiseptic and lavender air freshener, a combination that always made Olivia's throat tight. Rosa was awake but distant, her eyes focused on something only she could see. "Abuela," Olivia whispered. "Tell me about the watch again." Rosa's eyes flickered. Sometimes this worked. Sometimes anchoring her to a specific memory brought her back, pulled her out of the fog for a few precious minutes. "Miguel's watch," Rosa murmured. Her accent was thicker now than it had been before the Alzheimer's. The disease was erasing her English, leaving only Spanish behind. "El reloj de oro." "Yes, the gold watch. Tell me how he got it." Rosa's fingers tightened around Olivia's. Her breathing changed, became more focused. She was fighting her way back through the years, through the tangled pathways of her deteriorating mind. "We were leaving Guadalajara," Rosa said. Her voice was young again, clear. 1952, February. Cold for Mexico. But Miguel said it would be colder in El Norte. He said we needed to be strong. Olivia had heard this story 100 times. But now she listened differently. Now she was searching for details, for proof, for anything that could stand up against Robert Ashford's documentation and lawyers. We had nothing. 3 suitcases between us. My mother's rosary. My wedding dress. Miguel sold everything. The land his father left him, the horses, the house. Everything to buy passage north, to start over. "The land," Olivia said carefully. "What kind of land?" 50 acres outside Guadalajara. Good land. Miguel's family had it for 3 generations. Grew corn beans, some avocados. Not rich, but enough. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. He cried when he signed the papers. Felt like betraying his father. But there was no future for us there. We had to go. Who did he sell it to? Rosa's brow furrowed. The clarity was already fading. A man. An American. I don't remember. Miguel handled it. He said the American paid fair, paid in cash. Enough to get us to Texas and have something left to start with. Before you left, Olivia pressed gently. Miguel gave you the watch. Rosa's face transformed. The confusion lifted like morning fog. The morning we left, he woke me before dawn, took my hand, told me he had something for me. Her fingers moved unconsciously, tracing the engraving that wasn't there. Gold. So beautiful. I said we couldn't afford it. We needed every peso. He said it was already done. Said it was proof that even when we had nothing, we'd have something beautiful to pass down. Par mi amor eterno, Olivia whispered, for my eternal love. Rosa smiled, but tears ran down her weathered cheeks. He said no matter what happened in America, no matter how hard it got, I should look at that watch and remember we survived. We made it. We were brave enough to start over. Did Miguel have a watch too? Rosa blinked. The question confused her. Miguel's watch. Did the American give him 2 watches? One for you, one for him? No, just mine, Miguel said. She stopped struggling. He said the man gave him 2, but one was for his mother. But Miguel's mother died before we could give it to her. Miguel kept it. was going to sell it when we got to Texas to have extra money. But then, Rosa's breathing quickened. Her eyes went wide, seeing something decades old. Then what, abuela? It was gone. When we got to Texas, Miguel looked everywhere, all through our suitcases. He thought maybe it fell out on the bus. He was so upset. That watch was worth months of work. He needed it for rent, for food. He felt like he'd failed me. Olivia's heart was racing. 2 watches. Miguel had 2 watches. One disappeared before they could sell it. Are you sure? 2 watches. But Rosa was gone again, slipping back into the fog. Her eyes lost focus. Her hand went limp in Olivia's. Abuela? Is it time for lunch? Rosa asked, confused. Where's Miguel? He said he'd be back by lunch. Miguel had been dead for 47 years. Olivia kissed her grandmother's forehead and stepped into the hallway. Her mind was spinning. She pulled out her phone and typed notes before she could forget. 2 watches. American buyer. Land sale. 1 watch missing in Texas. If Miguel had 2 watches and one disappeared, could that be Robert's watch? But how? Why would an American businessman who bought land in Mexico give Miguel 2 identical watches? It didn't make sense. Unless the watches weren't a gift. Unless they were part of something else entirely. Olivia thought about Robert's face when he'd seen her grandmother's watch. The shock, the anger, the immediate denial. A man who was absolutely certain of his family's history, confronted with evidence that contradicted everything he believed. She pulled up the article about Charles Ashford again. Born in Boston, started his business in 1952, made his fortune in real estate and manufacturing. Real estate. Her fingers flew across the screen, searching. Charles Ashford Real Estate, Mexico, 1952. Nothing. Charles Ashford Guadalajara. Nothing. Charles Ashford Land Deals, California, Mexico. Wait. A small article from the Los Angeles Times, 1965. An op-ed about American businessmen buying land in Mexico during the 40s and 50s. The article mentioned several names, including Charles Ashford. It talked about aggressive acquisition strategies and questionable deals that displaced Mexican families. The article had been written by a Chicano activist group demanding investigation. Olivia's blood went cold. She clicked deeper, but there was nothing else. The story had died. No follow-up articles. No investigation. Just this single piece, buried in the archives. Charles Ashford had been in Mexico, had been buying land, in the exact time period when Miguel sold his family's property. The coincidence was too perfect, too precise. Olivia looked back through the window at her grandmother. Rosa had fallen asleep, her mouth slightly open, her breathing peaceful. She looked small in the hospital bed, fragile in a way that made Olivia's chest ache. For 73 years, Rosa had carried the story of her and Miguel's bravery, their sacrifice, their journey to America with nothing but hope and a gold watch. It was the foundation of her identity, the immigrant story, the American dream bought with sweat and love and impossible courage. What if that story was built on theft? What if Miguel hadn't sold his land fairly? What if Charles Ashford had taken it somehow and given Miguel 2 watches as what? Payment? Bribe? Guilt? And what if one of those watches ended up missing, only to surface 63 years later on a billionaire's wrist? Olivia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Clarendon and Associates confirmed for tomorrow, 2 p.m. Bring documentation if you have any. R. Ashford. Documentation. She had her grandmother's fading memories and a gold watch. Robert had lawyers and provenance and the weight of his family's reputation. But Olivia had something he didn't. She had nothing to lose. Her medical debt was already crushing her. Her job at the diner barely covered rent. Her grandmother was disappearing piece by piece, and there was nothing Olivia could do to stop it. The only thing she had left was the truth, and the stubborn Martinez pride that refused to let her family's story be erased. She texted back, "I'll be there." Then she called the one person who might be able to help. Father Miguel, named after her grandfather, had been the priest at St. Teresa's for 30 years. He knew everyone in Sacramento's Mexican community. If anyone had information about families who'd immigrated in the 50s, about land deals in Guadalajara, about Charles Ashford's early business, it would be him. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. Mija. Father Miguel's warm voice filled the line. It's late. Is Rosa okay? She's fine. Father, I need your help. I need to find out about something that happened in Mexico in 1952. She told him everything. The watch, Robert Ashford, her grandmother's story about the land sale, the missing second watch. Father Miguel listened without interrupting, the way he always did, giving her space to unpack the whole tangled mess. When she finished, there was a long silence. Olivia, he finally said, are you sure you want to open this door? Sometimes the past should stay buried. That's what Robert Ashford said. Maybe he's right. Or maybe he's scared of what I'll find. Another pause. Then Father Miguel sighed. There's a woman in my parish, Elena Vasquez. She's 89, came from Guadalajara in the 50s. She's mentioned before that families were pushed off their land by American developers. She might remember something. Can you ask her? I'll do better than that. Come to the church tomorrow morning before your meeting. I'll have her there. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Father. Don't thank me yet. Sometimes the truth is worse than the lies we tell ourselves to survive. After she hung up, Olivia sat in her car in the Sunrise Memory Care parking lot and cried. Not the quiet tears she usually allowed herself, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere primal. She cried for her grandmother, who was losing herself one memory at a time, for her mother, who'd worked herself to death trying to give Olivia a better life, for her grandfather Miguel, who died believing the American dream was real, and she cried for herself, for the weight of carrying all their hopes alone. When the tears finally stopped, Olivia looked at her grandmother's watch, still clutched in her hand. The gold gleamed in the parking lot lights. The rose engraving caught shadows, making the petals seem to move. Para mi, amor eterno. Miguel had loved Rosa enough to give her this, to promise her beauty in the midst of sacrifice. Whatever else was true, that love was real. And tomorrow, Olivia would start finding out what else was real, and what had been a lie all along. Even if it meant Robert Ashford's perfect family legacy came crashing down. Even if it meant her own family story was more complicated than she believed. The truth mattered more than comfort. It always had. The lobby of Clarendon and Associates looked like money had built it and taste had decorated it. Marble floors reflected the crystal chandelier overhead. The receptionist's desk was carved from a single piece of mahogany. Everything gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that required a staff. Olivia walked in wearing her cleanest jeans and a blazer she'd borrowed from Margaret. She felt like an imposter, like someone would spot her and escort her back to the world where she belonged, the world of cracked linoleum and burnt coffee. Robert was already there, standing by the window overlooking K Street. He wore a different suit than yesterday, but it looked just as expensive. When he turned and saw her, something flickered across his face. Not quite respect, but maybe recognition that she'd actually shown up. Miss Martinez. He nodded once. Mr. Ashford. The receptionist led them to a private examination room. Marcus Chun was waiting. A man in his 60s with jeweler's loops hanging around his neck and the kind of steady hands that came from decades of working with precious things. His examination table was covered in black velvet, lights positioned at precise angles. Both watches, please, he said without preamble. Olivia set hers down first. The gold looked dull under the harsh lights, less magical than it did in her grandmother's stories. Robert placed his next to it with a soft click. Marcus bent over them, silent. His face revealed nothing. He picked up the first watch, Olivia's, and examined it through his loop, turned it over, studied the engraving, set it down, and picked up Robert's. Same process, same meticulous silence. The room held its breath. Extraordinary, Marcus finally said. He wasn't smiling. In 40 years of doing this, I've never seen anything quite like it. They're identical, Olivia said. It wasn't a question. Down to the microscopic level. Marcus gestured for them to come closer. Look here, the rose engraving. 7 petals spiraling clockwise. The tool marks are identical. Same craftsman, same tools, probably made within days of each other. Robert's jaw tightened. That doesn't mean. The dent, Marcus interrupted, pointing to the tiny imperfection on the lower left edge of both watches. Same location, same depth. That's not wear and tear. That's a manufacturing flaw that happened before the final polish. Both watches have it. He flipped them over. Under the loop, the inscriptions gleamed. Para mi amor eterno 1952. Hand engraved, same style, same depth. And here, he pointed to something Olivia couldn't see with her naked eye. Serial numbers. Marcus wrote them down on a notepad. Watch 1, CH 1952-0847. Watch 2, CH 1952-0848. Consecutive, Robert said quietly. His face had gone pale. Made within hours of each other, possibly minutes. Same goldsmith, same workshop, commissioned as a matching pair. Marcus sat back. Both are authentic. Both are from 1952. Both are worth approximately $600,000 each. The number hit Olivia like a fist to the stomach. $600,000 in her apron pocket, on her hip, while she refilled coffee and scrubbed tables. I need to make a call, Robert said. His voice sounded hollow. He stepped out of the room. Through the glass wall, Olivia watched him pace. Phone pressed to his ear. His free hand kept running through his hair, a gesture that looked almost human, almost vulnerable. Marcus was photographing both watches from every angle, documentation for his report. Each click of the camera felt like a nail being driven into something. Your grandmother must have quite a story, Marcus said, without looking up. She does. Did the Alzheimer's is taking it. I'm sorry. And he sounded like he meant it. These watches, they're not just valuable because of the gold or the craftsmanship. They're valuable because of what they represent. Someone commissioned these as a pair. That's not random. That's intentional. What does it mean when someone has two identical watches made? Marcus considered the question. Usually, a gift for two people of equal importance. Siblings, parents, business partners, lovers. He paused. Or insurance. Insurance. If you're making a deal that can't be documented officially, if you need proof of an agreement that exists outside the law, you give each party a watch. Physical proof that the deal happened. Olivia's skin prickled. What kind of deal? The kind people don't want anyone to know about. Robert came back in. His expression had changed. Harder now, more focused. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by something that looked like determination or maybe dread. I've hired a private investigator, he said. David Torres, former FBI, specializes in historical research and document authentication. If there's a connection between my grandfather and your family, he'll find it. Why? Olivia asked. Why help me? Robert looked at the watches on the black velvet. Because if my grandfather lied about where this watch came from, I need to know what else he lied about. But Olivia had already made her own calls. While Robert was pacing and panicking, she'd texted Father Miguel. By the time she left Clarendon and Associates, she had a meeting scheduled for that evening at St. Teresa's Church. Father Miguel had found Elena Vasquez, and Elena had found something in her attic, letters, documents, photographs from Guadalajara in the 50s. The investigation was no longer just Robert's money and connections against Olivia's determination. It was two people, standing on opposite sides of a truth neither of them wanted to face, realizing they couldn't get there alone. 3 days later, David Torres delivered his first report. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown Neutral Ground, public enough to feel safe but quiet enough to talk. David was in his 50s, with gray at his temples and eyes that saw everything. He spread documents across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Charles Ashford traveled to Guadalajara, Mexico, on January 10, 1952, David said, pointing to a faded passenger manifest he'd pulled from airline archives. Returned February 5, 1952. 3.5 weeks. Business trip, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's what the expense reports say. Real estate opportunities. But look at this. David produced a newspaper clipping from the Guadalajara Reporter, an English-language paper that had served the American expat community. The headline read, American investors eye agricultural land. The article mentioned Charles Ashford by name, describing him as an ambitious industrialist seeking opportunities south of the border. It talked about land deals, about Mexican families selling property to Americans for cash, about the post-war boom that was bringing American money into Mexico. Sounds legitimate, Robert said. It does, until you look at what happened to those families. David pulled out another document, this one a complaint filed with the American consulate in Guadalajara, dated March 1952. 3 Mexican families claiming they'd been defrauded by American businessmen. Their land had been taken through forged documents, false promises, and signatures they claimed were not theirs. One of the names on the complaint, Miguel Martinez. Olivia's hands trembled as she read it. Her grandfather's signature, shaky but defiant, at the bottom of a document accusing Charles Ashford of theft. What happened to the complaint? She asked. Nothing, David said flatly. It was filed, logged, and ignored. The American consulate had no jurisdiction over Mexican property disputes. The Mexican government had bigger problems in 1952. The complaint died in a file cabinet. But Miguel got out, Olivia said. He and Rosa made it to Texas. Barely. David produced immigration records. They crossed at Laredo on February 12, 1952, 7 days after Charles Ashford returned to the United States. Miguel listed his profession as farmer and his assets as $300. $300. Everything Miguel owned, everything 3 generations of his family had built, reduced to $300 and whatever they could carry. Robert was staring at the documents like they were written in a language he didn't understand. My grandfather was a good man. He built his business honestly. He employed thousands of people. He gave to charity with money that started here. David tapped the property records. Charles Ashford's first factory, opened in Oakland in June 1952, cost $90,000. His business records show the capital came from private investments. But there's no paper trail, no investors named, no loan documents, just $90,000 that appeared from nowhere. From Miguel's land, Olivia whispered, 50 acres outside Guadalajara, sold allegedly for $300. Today, that land is worth approximately $47 million. In 1952, its real value was closer to $95,000. The math was brutal. Charles Ashford had paid $300 for land worth $95,000, then used that theft to build an empire. And Miguel and Rosa had crossed into America with nothing, believing they'd made a fair deal, believing in the promise of a better life that had been stolen from them before they'd even unpacked their suitcases. There's more, David said. He pulled out copies of Swiss banking records, obtained through channels Olivia suspected weren't entirely legal. Charles Ashford commissioned 2 watches from Breguet and Phil's in Geneva on January 15, 1952. Paid in advance, $8,000. Shipping address, a hotel in Guadalajara. $8,000 for 2 watches. More than Miguel saw from the land sale. Why 2? Robert asked. That's what I want to know, David said. You don't spend $8,000 on matching watches unless they mean something, unless they're proof of something. Olivia thought about what Marcus Chin had said. Insurance. Proof of a deal that couldn't be documented. He gave one to Miguel, she said slowly, as payment or as proof of the deal, and kept one for himself. But Miguel had 2 watches, Robert said. You said your grandmother mentioned 2. One for Rosa, one for Miguel's mother. Olivia's mind was racing, but Miguel's mother died before he could give it to her. So he kept it, planning to sell it in Texas, and then it disappeared. If you want to know how a billionaire's empire was really built, stick around. This gets darker. David was already ahead of him. I tracked shipping records. Both watches were sent to the Hotel Colonial in Guadalajara on January 28, 1952. Charles Ashford was staying there. 3 days later, there's a receipt for a meeting between Charles Ashford and Miguel Martinez, signed by both men. A meeting about what? Land transfer. Legal on paper, fraudulent in practice. David showed them a copy of the deed transfer, obtained from Mexican property archives. Miguel's signature was at the bottom, but even Olivia could see it looked wrong, shaky, uncertain. Nothing like the firm's signature on the complaint he'd filed later. Forged, Robert said. He wasn't defending his grandfather anymore. He was seeing the truth, and it was breaking something in him. Probably. Miguel shows up for what he thinks is a straightforward land sale. Charles wines and dines him, makes promises about fair payment, about helping him start over in America, gets Miguel drunk or distracted or trusting, swaps the real contract for a fake one with a fraction of the actual value. Miguel signs, thinking he's getting $90,000, gets $300 instead. And the watches? Olivia asked. My theory? Charles gave Miguel both watches as payment, told him they were worth money, that he could sell them in America. It kept Miguel quiet, kept him from making trouble immediately. By the time Miguel realized he'd been cheated, he was already in Texas with no way to prove what happened. But one watch disappeared, Robert said, or was taken back. David met Robert's eyes. Charles Ashford returned to the United States 3 days after that meeting. What if he took one watch back before Miguel left Mexico? What if the whole point was to keep one as proof, give one as payment, and make sure Miguel couldn't prove anything? The pieces were falling into place, each one more damning than the last. Charles Ashford hadn't built his fortune from nothing. He'd stolen it from families like Miguel's, from people who trusted him, who believed in the promise of American fairness and got exploitation instead. And he'd used a pair of gold watches as insurance, as proof of deals that couldn't be written down, as payment to keep his victims quiet. Our quest for truth is now inextricably linked, Robert said quietly. He was looking at Olivia, and for the first time, she saw him not as the enemy, but as someone trapped in the same nightmare from a different angle. I need to know what my grandfather did, Robert continued. All of it. And I need to make it right, even if it destroys your family's reputation, especially then. His voice was steel. I'd rather be known as the man who told the truth than the man who inherited a lie. Olivia reached across the table. After a moment, Robert shook her hand. His grip was firm, no longer the grip of a man dismissing a waitress, but the grip of a partner in something that mattered. David Torres smiled grimly. Then we keep digging, because I guarantee you, Miguel Martinez wasn't the only victim. David Torres didn't sleep much. Olivia learned this over the next 2 weeks, as they turned investigation into obsession. He'd send emails at 3 in the morning, documents he'd uncovered, connections he'd made, questions that kept multiplying like shadows. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Charles Ashford had made 4 trips to Mexico between 1950 and 1953. Each trip correlated with property transfers, with Mexican families suddenly selling land for fractions of its value. David found 7 cases that matched Miguel's. Families who'd filed complaints who'd claimed fraud, who'd been ignored by authorities on both sides of the border. He had system, David explained during one of their late-night meetings in Robert's office. Robert had cleared his schedule, moved meetings, delegated responsibilities. The investigation had become his full-time job, and Olivia watched him transform from entitled CEO to something harder, more focused. David spread surveillance logs across the conference table, pages from a private detective's notebook that he'd found in a storage unit that had belonged to Charles Ashford's estate. Your grandfather didn't work alone, David told Robert. He hired local investigators to identify vulnerable families, farmers in debt, families with sick relatives, people desperate enough to consider selling. The notebook was meticulous. Names, addresses, property values, family situations. Miguel Martinez was on page 14. 50 acres, 3rd generation. Wife expecting. Mother ill. Motivated seller. Olivia felt sick reading it. Her grandfather had been marked, targeted, selected because Charles Ashford's detective had identified him as desperate enough to exploit. Miguel wasn't unlucky, she said. He was hunted. Robert's face was gray. He kept touching his grandfather's watch, the gesture automatic, and now loaded with different meaning. How many families? That I can prove? 12. But I think it's more. David showed them a ledger, numbers without names. These entries match the pattern. Large cash withdrawals from Charles's accounts, corresponding with property acquisitions that don't have paper trails. I think we're looking at 20, maybe 30 families. Jesus, Robert whispered. The property records from Guadalajara told the story David's detective work had outlined. Miguel Martinez's 50 acres had been transferred to Charles Ashford on February 1st, 1952. The deed showed a sale price of $300. But when David obtained the original documents, calling in favors, paying bribes, Using connections Olivia didn't want to know about, they found something damning. Two versions of the deed existed. One showed $300. The other, buried in a back archive, misfiled, or hidden deliberately, showed $95,000. He created a fake deed with a low price, David explained. Had Miguel sign it when he was drunk or distracted or trusting. Then filed the real deed with Mexican authorities, showing the actual value. Made the transaction look legitimate to the government while paying Miguel a fraction of what he'd agreed to. Miguel's signature on the low-price deed was shaky, uncertain. His signature on the high-price deed, the one he'd probably never seen, was confident and clear. Forged, Robert said. He wasn't asking. Almost certainly, Charles probably traced Miguel's signature from another document. It's good enough to pass a casual inspection, but look here. David pointed to a microscopic detail. The pressure is wrong. Too even. A real signature has variation because your hand naturally shifts. This was copied carefully, deliberately. Can we prove it? In court? Maybe. But we don't need court. We need the truth. Olivia had been quiet, studying the documents with growing rage. Her grandfather had trusted Charles Ashford, had believed in the promise of fair dealing, of American opportunity, of starting over with dignity. And he'd been betrayed so completely that he'd spent the rest of his short life thinking he'd failed, thinking he'd gotten a fair price and just been unlucky in America. Miguel had died in a construction accident in 1978, his body broken by a collapsing scaffold. He'd been working overtime because Rosa needed surgery, working extra hours because they never had enough money, because the American dream kept slipping away no matter how hard he fought. He died believing he'd done his best, believing the fault was his. Father Miguel had connected them with Elena Vasquez, Rosa's cousin who still lived in Guadalajara. The video call happened on a Sunday afternoon, Elena's weathered face filling the laptop screen in Robert's office. She was 89, her memory sharp despite her age. When Olivia explained what they'd found, Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I remember Miguel," she said in Spanish. Olivia translated for Robert. He was so excited about the land sale. Said an American businessman was going to pay him enough to start over, enough to give Rosa a good life. "Do you remember the watches?" Olivia asked. "2 watches," Elena confirmed. "Miguel showed them to me before he left. Gold, so beautiful. He said the American gave them to him as a gift, a gesture of good faith. One for Rosa, one for his mother. But his mother died before they left. Heart attack. Miguel was devastated. What happened to her watch?" Elena's expression darkened. "Miguel said he was going to sell it in America, use the money to get settled. But when they got to Texas, it was gone. Rosa thought maybe Miguel had sold it quickly, used the money for rent. Miguel thought it had been stolen from their luggage. They fought about it. Rosa said Miguel was careless. Miguel said she was accusing him of lying. The watch had destroyed part of their marriage, a small crack that never quite healed, a source of tension whenever money got tight. Rosa wondering if Miguel had secretly sold the watch and spent the money. Miguel wondering if Rosa had hidden it and was lying. They never knew, Olivia said. They never knew Charles, Ashford took back, or that it was worth enough to change their lives, Robert added quietly. Elena leaned closer to the camera. "Miguel commissioned those watches," she said. "Not the American. Miguel." The room went silent. "What?" Olivia's heart was pounding. January 1952. Miguel went to Mexico City to visit a jeweler. He'd saved money for years to buy Rosa something special for their anniversary. He wanted 2 watches, one for Rosa, one for his mother. The jeweler said it would take months, but Miguel paid extra to have them rushed. "Did he use the name Brigitte and Phil's?" David asked. "I don't know the name, but Miguel said Swiss jeweler, very expensive, very beautiful. He paid $4,000. Elena's voice cracked. It was everything he'd saved, his whole life savings. The pieces exploded and reformed into something worse. Charles Ashford hadn't commissioned the watches as insurance or payment. He'd stolen Miguel's commission, had somehow discovered Miguel was having watches made, had intercepted them, had used Miguel's own anniversary gift to Rosa as bait in the land fraud. The inscription, Robert said, "Para mi amor eterno." Miguel chose that for Rosa. And Charles copied it onto his fake commission story. David finished. Made it look like he'd commissioned both watches, when really he'd just stolen Miguel's order. Olivia couldn't breathe. The cruelty was suffocating. Charles Ashford hadn't just stolen Miguel's land. He'd stolen his love letter to Rosa, had taken the physical proof of Miguel's devotion and turned it into a prop in a fraud scheme. And for 73 years, Rosa had worn that watch thinking it was Miguel's gift, never knowing it had been stolen and returned, never knowing the American who'd ruined their lives had briefly possessed the symbol of their love. Charles Ashford befriended Miguel, Elena said. Miguel talked about him like they were partners, like the American understood what it meant to work hard, to build something, to love your family. Miguel trusted him completely. That was the worst part, not just the theft, but the betrayal of trust. Charles had made Miguel believe they were alike, that the American dream was real, that hard work and good faith would be rewarded. And then he'd taken everything. After the call ended, the three of them sat in silence. The documents covered the conference table. Property records, photographs, ledgers, signatures. The evidence of a crime that had never been prosecuted. A theft that had destroyed lives while building fortunes. My grandfather was a monster, Robert said. He wasn't crying, but his voice was hollow. Everything I believed about him, about our family, about where our money came from. It's all built on this. Not everything, Olivia said. You're not him. You're choosing differently. But I benefited from what he did. Every dollar I've ever spent, every opportunity I've had, it's all stolen. Then we make it right, David said. However we can. Robert nodded slowly. Whatever it takes. But making it right was going to be harder than any of them imagined. Because someone else knew about Charles Ashford crimes. Someone who'd been protecting the family secret for decades. Someone who had everything to lose if the truth came out. And he was about to make his move. Malcolm Ashford had been watching. He'd noticed when Robert canceled board meetings. He'd seen the private investigator coming and going from Robert's office. He'd heard whispers about a waitress asking questions, about Mexican property records, about watches. Malcolm was Charles Ashford's youngest son, Robert's uncle. At 72, he controlled the family trust. $340 million in assets that funded scholarships, museums, philanthropic endeavors, and the lifestyle Malcolm believed he'd earned by being born into the right family. He was also the family historian, the keeper of records, the one who'd spent 50 years carefully curating Charles Ashford's legacy. Every biography, every plaque, every building named after Charles had been vetted by Malcolm. The official story was pristine. Immigrant success, self-made man, generous, philanthropist. Malcolm had found the evidence years ago. The surveillance logs, the forged deeds, the pattern of fraud. And he destroyed most of it, buried the rest, made sure the truth stayed hidden where it belonged. He thought it was gone forever. Thought the victims were all dead, their children scattered, their complaints lost to time. Thought the Ashford legacy was safe. But Robert was digging it all up again, and Malcolm couldn't allow that. Olivia was closing the diner when Malcolm's car pulled into the parking lot. Black Mercedes, windows tinted, the kind of vehicle that announced money and power. She'd never seen it before, but she recognized the threat immediately. Malcolm stepped out wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. He was tall, silver-haired, distinguished in the way that came from generations of good nutrition and minimal stress. He smiled as he approached, but his eyes were cold. Miss Martinez, I'm Malcolm Ashford, Robert's uncle. I was hoping we could talk. Every instinct told Olivia to run. I'm late for. This won't take long. Malcolm gestured to a table by the window. Please. It wasn't a request. They sat. Malcolm ordered nothing. He folded his hands on the table and studied her like she was a specimen under glass. You've caused quite a disruption in my nephew's life, Malcolm said. He's neglecting his responsibilities, chasing ghosts, making accusations about a man who died 40 years ago. Charles Ashford stole my grandfather's land. Your grandfather sold land in a legal transaction and then had regrets. That's not theft. That's business. The deed was forged. Prove it. Malcolm's smile widened. Oh, wait, you can't. Because you're a waitress with a dead grandfather and a grandmother who can't remember what she had for breakfast. Your word against the documented legacy of one of California's most respected families. The words were designed to wound, and they did. But Olivia had spent her whole life being underestimated. She was used to it. I have the watch. I have the records. I have witnesses. You have a watch that proves nothing. Records that can be interpreted a dozen ways. And witnesses who are elderly, unreliable, or biased. Malcolm leaned forward. But I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to offer you a solution that benefits everyone. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on the table. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that lawyers used. $500,000, tax-free, in exchange for a signed statement that your grandmother's story was mistaken, that you were confused about the watch's origins, and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. $500,000. Olivia's medical debt. Rosa's care for the rest of her life. Security she'd never imagined. All she had to do was call her grandmother a liar and walk away. No, Malcolm's smile finally cracked. You're making a mistake. I'm honoring my grandfather's memory. Your grandfather was nobody. A farmer who couldn't make it in his own country. Couldn't make it here. He died in an accident because he was reckless. His wife is losing her mind. And you're destroying your life over a story that doesn't matter to anyone but you. It matters to me. That's enough. Malcolm's expression turned ugly. The veneer of civility stripped away, revealing something predatory underneath. Your grandmother's care is expensive. Sunrise Memory Care is a private facility. They require payment every month. If someone were to suggest that Rosa Martinez is being neglected, that her guardian is unfit, well, the state takes those allegations seriously. Rosa could be moved to a state facility. You could lose guardianship entirely. The threat landed like a physical blow. Olivia felt her chest tighten, her vision narrow. You wouldn't. I would do anything to protect my family's legacy. Anything. Malcolm stood. You have 48 hours to sign. After that, I make the call. And trust me, Miss Martinez, you don't want to fight me. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. Judges who owe me favors. I will bury you so deep, no one will ever find you. He left the envelope on the table and walked out. Olivia sat frozen, the threat still echoing in her ears. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $500,000, and a legal document that would erase everything. Her grandfather's truth, her grandmother's memories, the evidence they'd worked so hard to uncover. All she had to do was sign. She called Robert. He answered on the first ring. Malcolm knows, she said. He just threatened me. Offer me money to drop everything and sign an NDA. How much? $500,000. Robert was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot of money. He also threatened to have Rosa declared incompetent, to have me stripped guardianship. Jesus. Robert's voice turned hard. He can't do that. Can't he? You said it yourself. Your family has resources I can't imagine. Lawyers, judges, connections. What do I have? Debt and a grandmother who doesn't remember my name half the time. You have me, Robert said, and you have the truth. That's more powerful than Malcolm thinks. But Olivia wasn't sure anymore. The truth felt fragile suddenly, easy to bury under money and power and legal threats. What good was being right if it cost her everything? David Torres called an hour later. His voice was tight, controlled. I'm out. What? Someone broke into my office tonight. Trashed the place. Took my backup drives. Left a note that said if I didn't stop investigating the Ashfords, they'd make sure I never worked again. David exhaled slowly. I have a family, Olivia. I can't risk them. It was Malcolm. Probably. I can't prove it, but I got the message. He paused. I'm sorry. I believe you. I believe Miguel, but I can't be the one to fight this battle. Another ally gone. Another door closing. The truth was slipping away, and Olivia could feel Malcolm's walls closing in around her. Robert received the family pressure that same night. A conference call with his board of directors. Malcolm's voice smooth and reasonable as he explained that Robert was having a mental health crisis and needed to take a leave of absence. That the investigation into Charles Ashford's business practices was unhealthy and destructive and needed to stop immediately. You're tarnishing everything our grandfather built, Malcolm said. Everything our family represents. For what? A waitress and a conspiracy theory. It's not a theory. It's documented fraud. It's ancient history. No one cares. Let it go, Robert. Protect the Ashford name while you still can. But Robert had already chosen his side. He'd seen the evidence. He talked to Elena. He'd watched Olivia fight for her family's dignity with nothing but stubborn courage. He wasn't going to abandon her now, even if it cost him everything, even if it destroyed the legacy he'd spent his whole life defending. Because some things mattered more than money. Some truths couldn't stay buried. And Malcolm Ashford was about to learn that trying to silence the truth only made it louder. The war was just beginning. The Ashford Foundation Gala was held at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, in a ballroom that had hosted presidents and tech moguls and the kind of wealth that shaped policy. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from a ceiling. The floor was marble, polished to a mirror shine. 400 people in evening gowns and tuxedos filled the space with a quiet murmur of power discussing itself. This was Malcolm's event, his stage, the annual celebration of Charles Ashford's legacy, where the family handed out scholarships and awards to promising young entrepreneurs, where they told the story of the self-made man, the immigrant success, the American dream personified. The banner behind the podium read, Charles Ashford's American Dream Legacy, 73 years of excellence. Media cameras lined the back wall. The San Francisco Chronicle was there. Business Insider. Local television stations. This wasn't just a family event. It was a public relations machine, polishing the Ashford name for another generation. Malcolm stood near the podium, greeting guests with the practiced charm of someone who'd been networking since birth. He wore a tuxedo that fit like it had been grown on him. His smile was wide and empty. Robert stood across the room, separate from the crowd. He wore his tuxedo like armor, his expression unreadable. In his pocket were 2 flash drives, one containing every document David Torres had uncovered, the other containing video testimony from Elena Vasquez. He'd rehearsed his scripted speech 100 times. The speech Malcolm had approved about continuing his grandfather's vision, about family values and generational wealth used responsibly. Robert was going to burn that speech and everything it represented. Olivia entered through the service entrance with the other catering staff. She wore the same black and white uniform she'd worn at the Valley View Diner, the cosmic irony not lost on her. She was invisible here, just another server carrying trays of champagne and canapes to people who'd never look at her face. But she saw everything. She saw Malcolm working the room, his confidence unshakable. She saw Robert standing alone, his jaw tight with determination. She saw the massive screens on either side of the podium, ready to display whatever presentation Malcolm had prepared. Those screens were about to show something very different. Margaret had wanted to come to support her, but Olivia had said no. This needed to be just her, just the granddaughter of Miguel Martinez, standing in a room full of people who'd benefited from his stolen dreams, about to tear down the lies that had protected them. Her grandmother's watch was in her pocket. The weight of it steadied her. Malcolm took the podium at 8 o'clock sharp. The crowd quieted, champagne glasses pausing mid-sip. He tapped the microphone, his smile warm and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. For 73 years, the Ashford Foundation has celebrated the values my father, Charles Ashford, embodied: hard work, innovation, and the belief that anyone, regardless of their origins, can achieve greatness in America. The crowd applauded. Olivia felt acid in her throat. Tonight, we honor that legacy by presenting the Charles Ashford Innovation Award to 5 remarkable young entrepreneurs who represent the future of American excellence. But first, I'd like to invite my nephew, Robert Ashford, to say a few words about what our family legacy means to him. Malcolm gestured to Robert. The spotlight swung, catching him in its glare. For a moment, Robert didn't move. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then he walked to the podium. Malcolm stepped aside, still smiling, still confident that he'd won, that his threats had worked, that Robert would read the approved speech and maintain the facade. Robert placed his notes on the podium. The speech Malcolm had written, the lies wrapped in eloquence. He looked out at the crowd, at the media cameras, at Malcolm standing to his left, expectant. Then Robert looked at Olivia, standing near the kitchen entrance in her catering uniform, holding an empty tray. Their eyes met across the ballroom. She nodded once. Permission. Solidarity. The understanding that some truths were worth any cost. Robert pushed the scripted notes aside. "I need to tell you the real story of Charles Ashford," he said. The room went still. Malcolm's smile froze. A few people in the front row glanced at each other, confused. Robert pulled the flash drive from his pocket and inserted it into the podium's computer. The screens behind him flickered to life. My grandfather wasn't a self-made man. He was a thief. The first image appeared, the two watches side by side, identical in every detail. The crowd gasped. Malcolm moved toward the podium, but two security guards, ones Robert had hired privately, stepped into his path. "These watches tell a story my family has buried for 73 years. A story of fraud, of stolen land, of immigrant families destroyed so my grandfather could build his fortune." The screens shifted. Property records from Guadalajara. Miguel Martinez's signature on two different deeds, one showing $300, one showing $95,000. The forgery was obvious, undeniable, documented. Miguel Martinez was a farmer in Guadalajara, Mexico. He owned 50 acres of land his family had worked for 3 generations. In 1952, my grandfather befriended him, gained his trust, and then stole everything Miguel owned through forged documents and fraudulent deals. More images, the surveillance logs, the complaints filed with the American consulate, the pattern of families defrauded, dreams destroyed, lives ruined. Malcolm was shouting now, trying to push past security. "This is a fabrication. Turn it off. Robert, you're having a breakdown." But Robert's voice cut through, amplified by the microphone. Miguel commissioned 2 gold watches as anniversary gifts for his wife and mother. My grandfather intercepted that commission, used Miguel's own love letters as props in his fraud, and then kept one watch for himself as a trophy. The screen showed Elena Vasquez, patched in by a video call from Guadalajara. Her face filled the displays, lined with age and dignity. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said in Spanish, English subtitles appearing below. "Miguel Martinez was my cousin. I watched Charles Ashford destroy our family. I'm here to tell you what really happened." Elena's testimony was devastating. She described Miguel's excitement about the land sale, his trust in the American businessman, his devastation when he realized he'd been cheated. She described the watches, Miguel's pride in having saved enough to buy something beautiful for Rosa, his confusion when one disappeared, his death believing he'd failed his family. The ballroom was silent except for Elena's voice. 400 people frozen, witnessing the dismantling of a legacy they'd celebrated for decades. Then the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Olivia had arranged this with Robert, the final piece of evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. Rosa Martinez entered in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse from Sunrise Memory Care. She was dressed simply but with dignity, her white hair brushed smooth, her hands folded in her lap. Around her neck hung her gold pocket watch on a chain. The crowd parted. The wheelchair rolled slowly down the center aisle. Camera flashes went off. Rosa looked confused by the attention, her eyes distant with Alzheimer's fog. But when she reached the front and saw the screens showing Miguel's face in an old photograph, something shifted in her expression. Clarity, sharp and painful, breaking through the disease for one precious moment. "Miguel," she whispered. Robert knelt beside her wheelchair. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Robert Ashford, Charles's grandson. I'm so sorry for what my grandfather did to your family." Rosa looked at him, her eyes focusing with effort. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers trembling. "You have his eyes," she said. "But Kinder." Robert's composure cracked. Tears ran down his face as he took Rosa's hand. The microphone was suddenly in Olivia's hand. She didn't remember walking to the podium, didn't remember security handing it to her. But there she was, standing in front of 400 people, in her catering uniform, with her grandmother watching and the whole world suddenly paying attention. Her hands shook, her voice cracked on the first word. But then she thought of Miguel, dying in a construction accident because he'd been working overtime to pay for Rosa's surgery. She thought of her mother, working 3 jobs and dying at 52 from a heart attack brought on by stress and exhaustion. She thought of every bill collector, every eviction notice. Every night she'd lain awake, doing math that never worked out. And the words came. Charles Ashford didn't just steal a watch. He stole my grandfather's future. He stole my grandmother's security. He stole my mother's inheritance. And he built your fairy tale on my family's nightmare. The ballroom was silent. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat, could hear Rosa's breathing, could hear the click of camera shutters capturing this moment. My grandmother has Alzheimer's. Her medication costs $4,800 a month. I'm a waitress drowning in medical debt because 3 generations ago, a man with power and privilege decided my family's dreams mattered less than his profit margin. She gestured to the screens, to the evidence displayed there. My grandfather didn't fail in America. America failed him. Charles Ashford failed him. This room, all of you who've celebrated this legacy, who've accepted scholarships and awards in his name, you've been honoring a lie. That's enough, Malcolm snarled. He'd broken free from security and was moving toward the stage. This is slander. This is truth, Robert said, stepping between Malcolm and Olivia. It's the truth, and you've known it for decades. Malcolm's face went purple. You ungrateful. Charles built this family, built this fortune. Those Mexicans would have lost that land anyway. We gave them more than they deserved. The words hung in the air. Malcolm seemed to realize what he'd said, how it sounded. But it was too late. Every camera in the room had captured it. Every journalist was already typing on their phones. These people were nobodies. Malcolm continued, digging deeper. Farmers who couldn't make it in their own country. Charles gave them opportunity, gave them cash they never would have seen otherwise. And 70 years later, this waitress shows up with a sob story, and you're all acting like stealing is wrong? Olivia's voice cut through his rant. Like fraud is a crime? Like immigrant families deserve the same justice as wealthy white men. The crowd was murmuring now, phones out, recording, sharing. This was going viral in real time. The Ashford legacy crumbling under its own lies. Robert moved back to the podium. The final piece of evidence loaded on the screen. A video call connecting to Switzerland. The elderly watchmaker from Brigitte and Phil's appeared, speaking through a translator. Charles Ashford did not commission these watches, the watchmaker said. His records were displayed on screen. The original commission in Miguel Martinez's name, paid for in January 1952, intercepted before delivery. He stole another man's order, used another man's love letter. I have felt guilty about this for 70 years. But I was young and scared, and Charles paid me to stay quiet. I'm not staying quiet anymore. Malcolm lunged for the podium. Security grabbed him, but not before he snarled into the microphone. You're destroying everything. For what? For people who don't matter. For history that's dead and buried. It's not buried, Olivia said quietly. It's sitting right here in a wheelchair, holding the evidence. It's working double shifts to pay for medication. It's living with the consequences of your grandfather's theft every single day. Security escorted Malcolm toward the exit. The entire ballroom watched him go, his face contorted with rage, his dignity stripped away by his own words. Someone in the crowd started recording, and Malcolm's rant, "These people were nobodies," was already spreading across social media, retweeted and shared, and held up as everything wrong with inherited wealth. Robert returned to the microphone. His face was wet with tears, but his voice was steady. The Ashford Foundation was built on stolen land and destroyed dreams. Tonight that ends. We will be reaching out to all families defrauded by Charles Ashford. We will provide full restitution. We will rename this foundation and dedicate it to restoring what was taken. He looked at Rosa, still sitting in her wheelchair, clutching her watch. Mrs. Martinez, I can't undo what my grandfather did, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Starting now. The room erupted. Some people were crying. Others were shouting questions. The journalists were already writing their stories. This would be front-page news by morning. The viral moment that destroyed a legacy and maybe, just maybe, started rebuilding something honest in its place. Olivia knelt beside her grandmother. Rosa was looking at the watch in her hands, then at the watch on the screen, then back again. Her confusion was clearing, memory surfacing through the fog. Miguel's watches, Rosa said. Both of them, together again. Yes, abuela. Both of them. Finally home. Rosa smiled, and for one perfect moment, she was young again. The woman who'd crossed the border with nothing but hope and a gold watch. The woman who'd believed in promises even when they were broken. The woman who'd survived. He would be proud of you, Rosa whispered. My Miguel. He would be so proud. And Olivia believed her. 3 months later, Olivia stood in an office that still didn't feel real. The Rosa Martinez Foundation occupied the entire 15th floor of a building in downtown Sacramento. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was modern but warm, and on the wall behind her desk, in a climate-controlled case, sat 2 gold pocket watches side by side. Together at last, the way they'd always been meant to be. The foundation had launched with $12 million from the Ashford Family Trust, restitution for Miguel Martinez's stolen land, calculated with 73 years of accrued interest. Malcolm had fought it, of course, but he was fighting from the outside now, removed from the trust and under investigation for document destruction. The legal battles would take years, but the outcome was inevitable. The truth had momentum now. It couldn't be stopped. Olivia's medical debt was gone, paid in full. The weight of it lifted, so suddenly she'd cried for an hour the first debt-free morning. Rosa had been moved to a private care facility that specialized in Alzheimer's patients, where she had her own room with a view of a garden and nurses who spoke Spanish and treated her with the dignity she'd always deserved. But the money wasn't the point. It had never been about the money. Olivia heard the elevator chime and turned to see Robert walking in with coffee from the shop downstairs. He brought her one every Tuesday morning. The routine they'd fallen into as the foundation became their shared mission. Elena just confirmed, Robert said, handing her the coffee. The memorial in Guadalajara is approved. They're breaking ground next month. The memorial would honor Miguel Martinez and the other families Charles Ashford had defrauded. It would sit on the land Miguel had owned, the land that had been returned to the community and transformed into a public park. Miguel's name would be carved in stone, permanent and undeniable. And the scholarships? Olivia asked. Fully funded. 25 students this year, all from families who immigrated within the last generation. We're calling them the Miguel Martinez American Dream Scholarships. But the real dream this time, not the stolen one. They'd also begun the process of removing Charles Ashford's name from buildings throughout California. The Ashford Wing at Sacramento General was now the Martinez Ashford Wing for Immigrant Health Services. The Charles Ashford Business School at UC Davis had been renamed. Every plaque, every building, every monument to a lie was being corrected, one truth at a time. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something. Robert visited Rosa every week. The first visit had been Olivia's idea. She thought Rosa deserved to hear an apology from Charles Ashford's grandson, to know that someone from that family acknowledged the harm. She hadn't expected what actually happened. Rosa had been having a good day, lucid and present. When Robert walked in and introduced himself, she'd studied his face for a long moment. Then she'd reached out and taken his hand. "You're not your grandfather," she'd said. "You don't have to carry his sins." Robert had broken down, sobbed like a child while Rosa held his hand and forgave him for crimes he hadn't committed but had benefited from his entire life. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he'd said. "No one deserves forgiveness. That's what makes grace." Rosa had smiled. "But you're doing the work anyway. That's what matters." Before he left that day, Robert had taken off his grandfather's watch, the watch he'd worn like a crown for 62 years, and held it out to Rosa. "This always belonged to you," he'd said. "It was Miguel's gift. It should stay with his family." Rosa had closed his fingers back around it. "Keep it. Wear it. But let it remind you of the man Miguel should have been allowed to become, not the man Charles prevented him from being." So Robert wore the watch still, but differently now, not as proof of legacy, but as a promise of restoration. The foundation's work expanded quickly. They'd identified 7 other families defrauded by Charles Ashford, and investigations were ongoing into whether there were more. Each family received restitution calculated based on the current value of what had been stolen. Some of the families didn't want money. They wanted acknowledgement, apology, truth. The foundation provided all 3. Olivia had quit waitressing the day the foundation launched. Margaret had thrown her a party at the Valley View, And Olivia had cried saying goodbye to the cracked Formica tables and burnt coffee and customers who'd watched her grow up. But she didn't miss it. This work, restoring what had been taken, honoring what had been forgotten. This was what she was meant to do. Her mother would have been proud. Miguel would have been proud. And on Rosa's good days, when clarity broke through the fog, she'd tell Olivia exactly that. The partnership between Olivia and Robert was unlikely but unshakable. They came from different worlds, she from poverty and struggle, he from privilege and power. But they'd met in the space where truth mattered more than comfort, and that common ground was solid. Robert had transformed the Ashford businesses too. New ethics policies, independent oversight, anonymous reporting for employees who witnessed fraud. He couldn't undo his grandfather's crimes, but he could make sure they never happen again under his watch. Some of the old guard had resigned in protest. Good riddance, Robert said. Let them leave. Let them take their inherited entitlement somewhere else. The new Ashford Industries was smaller, leaner, more honest. And Robert slept better at night than he had in years. One Tuesday in late spring, Olivia brought Rosa to the foundation office. It was a good day. Rosa was present, engaged, asking questions. She walked through the space slowly, taking the photographs on the walls. Miguel as a young man, Rosa and Miguel on their wedding day, the land outside Guadalajara before it was stolen, the memorial under construction. When she reached the case holding both watches, Rosa stopped. She pressed her palm against the glass, her breath fogging it slightly. Both of them, she whispered. Miguel's gifts. Together. Together, Olivia confirmed. The way they should have been 73 years ago. Rosa turned to look at her granddaughter, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. You did this. You fought for him. For us. For the truth. I just finished what Miguel started. No, Mija. You started something new. Something better. Rosa took Olivia's face in her hands. Miguel crossed that border believing in promises. You made sure those promises came true, even if it took 3 generations. Olivia held her grandmother while she cried. While they both cried, while 73 years of injustice finally began to feel like they might someday balance out. Legacy wasn't what you inherited. Legacy was what you chose to do with the truth once you found it. Legacy was Robert Ashford using his privilege to dismantle the lies that gave him that privilege in the first place. Legacy was Olivia Martinez refusing to let her family's story be erased, no matter how powerful the people trying to bury it. Legacy was Miguel Martinez's stolen dreams becoming a foundation that would help hundreds of families avoid his fate. Legacy was 2 gold watches, reunited after decades apart, displayed not as trophies but as testimony, proof that truth could survive even when everything else was taken. True wealth isn't what you inherit. It's what you do when you discover the truth. Justice may be delayed by generations, but it cannot be buried forever. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit their family was wrong and spend their life making it right. That's not a fairy tale. That's real. That's possible. That's the promise Miguel and Rosa believed in when they crossed that border in 1952. Not that life would be easy, but that truth would matter, that courage would count, that speaking up could change the world. And 73 years later, their granddaughter proved them right. If this story moved you, if it made you believe justice is possible even when it takes generations, hit that like button. Subscribe for more untold stories of truth overcoming privilege, of ordinary people refusing to let their families be forgotten. Share this with someone who needs to believe that speaking up matters, that fighting for truth is worth the cost. And leave a comment. What would you do if you discovered your family's success was built on someone else's suffering? Would you protect the lie or honor the truth? Because that choice between comfort and courage, between legacy and honesty, that's the choice we all face eventually. Make it count.